All right. I think we're going to, because I think we're going to have quite a good conversation here. So, welcome everybody. If you're here for the AI and energy panel, you're in the right room. I won't lie, when I saw whiskey shots with breakfast, I kind of worried about how many of you would be left standing for the last session of the day. So, very grateful to see so many people here. The topic is AI and energy and data centers, of course, where those two things come together. So we put together a very high-powered panel, pun intended, on the topic to keep you engaged right up to the end. We'll try to get to questions from Huva. And beyond asking a question, you can vote on which questions you like that are on there. And we're going to go by popular opinion in terms of what we ask. So please do that. My name is Cameron Brown. I lead the energy practice at Global Public Affairs, and I'm your moderator. But let me jump right into introducing the panel. And when you have a minister from the Crown on the panel, you need to start there. So we are very happy to have the Honorable Nate Glubish, Minister of Technology and Innovation for the Government of Alberta with us today. Beside him is Jay Reichel, the COO of Bell AI Fabric. Beside Jay is Coral Kent, the Provincial Governor Leader for Amazon Web Services. Beside Coral is Sean Wilson, the VP External Affairs at Pembina Pipeline. And beside Sean is Lauren Armstrong, the VP Corporate Affairs at Beacon Data Center. So, not bearing the lead, going straight to a question from the minister. And after the minister's done, for all of the questions, anybody wants to jump in, please feel free to do that. So, to the minister, you're the minister responsible for AI and data centers in Alberta. You've been at the forefront of Alberta's investment attraction efforts in the space. We heard Ambassador Hoekstra and Premier Smith both mention big announcements in the space recently, which the panel will certainly come back to. So why do you think Alberta is emerging as an attractive jurisdiction for data center investment compared with other North American markets?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I like to lay the groundwork for this because it's bigger than just a data center question. The fact is, Alberta's been a leader in AI research for over 20 years globally. Folks long before I was in politics had the foresight to invest in what is now called the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute back in the early 2000s. And they recruited some of the best researchers in the world to come to Alberta and to lead the efforts to essentially pioneer the field of machine learning and reinforcement learning, which are key cornerstones to the technology we all know as artificial intelligence. So we have Turing Award winner Richard Sutton, who came here and has been one of the three godfathers of AI. You have him, and you have Joshua Bengio in Montreal at Mila, and you have Jeffrey Hinton at Vector in Toronto. And so all the technology that we all see as commonplace today was born out of those three researchers and their initial work. So a significant part of AI that we all use every day today was born in Alberta. So it just makes sense then that also Alberta is a leader in using AI. And as a public service, we've been very aggressive to say we want every public servant to be AI proficient. We want to be using AI responsibly across the public service. We have demonstrated that we can now build enterprise-grade applications 95% cheaper and 95% faster than the old way of doing it. I wrote on my Substack recently about an example where we had a project we needed to build. It was going to cost us $54 million to go through an external consultant, one of the big 5 consulting firms you would all recognize. And we just said, we don't have $54 million and we can't wait 3 to 5 years for this to be done. So we did it ourselves, and we did it in 10 months for $2.5 million. That's a 95% savings for taxpayers on a single IT project. And now imagine we have dozens of those every year. So we are on the cusp of saving billions of dollars for Alberta taxpayers and showing every government in Canada how we did it. So if we're leaders in AI research and we're leaders in AI adoption, it also makes sense we need to be leaders in AI infrastructure, because we can't have all these nice things if we don't have the data centers that power them. And Alberta has the gas in abundance. We have a regulatory environment that supports developing that gas and turning it into electricity. We have the lowest tax environment in Canada, and we have a business-friendly environment in general. So we got set to say, how could we become the compute capital of Canada? And we started that initiative 2 years ago. We've revised our legislation to create a clear, fair, and competitive environment. and the world's come knocking. And as you've all seen, Meta just announced a $13 billion project that pairs with a natural gas power plant that's also $4.5 billion that will power that site. And that's the first really big, real project that's moved forward that's a proof point of Alberta's leadership.
Okay, I'll roll in the next question. This is for Coral and Amazon Web Services. With a group this knowledgeable on stage, there's always the risk we jump into the middle and leave the audience behind. So I thought, starting from the beginning, to just set the stage a bit. What's driving the unprecedented demand for AI and data center infrastructure that we're seeing? And is this moment different than just, being slightly more than what we've seen in the past?
Well, the minister just touched on it. I've been at AWS for almost a decade, 9 years, right after we opened our first region in Montreal. And of course, our second region here in Alberta opened about 4 years ago. And even a year or two ago, most of the usage that we would see would be, researchers who had very, very in-depth knowledge of how to use some of these extremely powerful AI tools and models. And we weren't seeing a lot of actual applications of it in the public sector. And I work with governments all across Canada. We would see it in some of the commercial organizations that you work for. I think Amazon.ca is a great example that everybody knows. We've been using these AI services and tools for a long time. That's how we know what you're going to order before you do and are able to suggest it to you. Netflix is another large organization. That's the one that I use when my grandmother asks me what I actually do. I'm like, Netflix, we run Netflix and we can suggest to you what you're going to watch. So that was a very common thing, but you really wouldn't see it very much at all in public sector application. But I would say in the last year or so, and Alberta is absolutely leading the way in this, we're seeing it all across public sector in the digitization of citizen services, student services. And because these models and applications have become more accessible to anyone who's interested in learning about them, the demand has grown exponentially as well. And so being able to build out infrastructure like we have, our investment in Alberta is $4.3 billion in the region that we've built here. And we plan to continue that. And really, it's just, it's sort of like when the internet started and a few universities and centers were using it, and it really wasn't something that was accessible to everybody. And now it's in obviously everybody's hand every day. And I just see that continuing to accelerate.
I guess question for the panel as a follow-up, is that a linear acceleration or are we going to start to see exponential growth in the demand for this?
Well, I mean, I'm sure everyone on the panel could speak to that, but I think what we've all seen is that exponential growth has already begun, right? You look at the total magnitude of compute required to power the internet in the late 90s. It was tiny by comparison. You look at how much it took just to deal with cloud-based storage of pictures and files, tiny by comparison. You look at even just cloud applications, right? Like, so for example, we're very grateful to AWS for their data center just outside of Calgary that they put in place, the cloud data center, gosh, that would be about 5 years ago, give or take. At the time, one of the biggest investments in Alberta's history. But that was what, 50 megawatts? Give or take?
Yeah.
Give or take, 50 megawatts. And now you look at this Meta deal, 1,800 megawatts once it's fully built out. You just can't even compare the scale. But that's just because the AI tools today are completely different than the workloads that we had 4 or 5 years ago. And they're just going to continue to evolve. And so those jurisdictions that can develop a policy environment that facilitates the development of this infrastructure will win by attracting it. And think of these like the power plants of the Industrial Revolution. When you built a power plant in a community, then you could build factories and you could expand, the residential communities around it, and you could create wealth for everybody around it. Data centers are the same thing. It is the electricity of the modern era.
Yeah, and I guess just to build on that a little bit, I mean, we're obviously seeing increased demand from customers, and they're coming from all around the world. And I think one of the things that I appreciated about the AI strategy that came out last month is it put a stake in the ground to say, we're going to require 5 gigawatts of capacity. I personally think that that's low. And the thing that we can see is that exponential growth, a lot of that is being served from outside of Canada right now. We want that to be happening inside of the country. I think a lot of that is going to end up being built in Alberta. And, we're also seeing outreach from Europe, from the Asia Pacific region, right, who are seeing, right, Canada, right, that a data center in Calgary is a safe place, for them to put their data that they want to be, basically have Canada be their sovereign second home. And so the capacity that we can build out here is not just to serve our own needs, but to serve out, I think, that sovereign capacity, that exponential growth that countries around the globe are seeing.
Next question is to Sean at Pembina Pipeline. I think it's fair to say Pembina Pipeline had a pretty big stampede. There's a few announcements in there. We heard the Premier mention the Meta announcements several times, and your Greenlight project is very much tied into that project. So tell us about your project. What are your main takeaways about the prospects for overall data center growth as a result of working through that project? And did anything surprise you as you were moving through that process?
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. I think kind of going back to what the minister said there, a lot of work has gone into kind of planning out what does the environment look like and shaping it for investment. And I think the one thing that was really important kind of as a part of the AI strategy is thinking about how do you grow, how do you diversify, but at the same time protect affordability and reliability for Albertans. And so one of the pieces that everyone's been talking about data centers all day in a lot of the panels were the power piece. We're actually doing the gas to power and generating that power for that data center. So we're the ones kind of off the grid. Really, Meta's bringing their own power to actually power the data center and not relying on the grid that all the other Albertans, all of us are using right now. So that's kind of our project in a nutshell. That's how we fit. 932 megawatts of power generation should be in service by about mid-2030. And it's an exciting thing for Pembina because it's a little bit of a step out for us, but it's complementary at the same time. If you had a chance to join the Premier speaking, I guess at lunch, she talked about kind of some of the other pieces that go into kind of being ready to support such a project and data centers on a kind of a scalable basis. And part of it is just having that, the gas plants and the pipelines and all the other infrastructure that you require just to get the gas to power generation piece and then into the data centers. And I think she referred to zeros and ones, kind of going back to the Matrix movie. But that was all kind of part of what was really interesting for Pembina because we play in that space right now. And so it was just for us a natural fit, especially when you see kind of some of the growth that's coming. I think one of the takeaways from the broader announcement was, again, having spent some time with Meta and Minister Glubish and the broader Alberta government team, is that, we went from a place of talking about all these competitive advantages, the access to gas, the ability to build big infrastructure, workforce, cold, all those different things. And to see us go from a market of potential to a market that can compete and win was pretty awesome walking away from that day. And there was a ton of work that went into that from behind the scenes by a whole bunch of industry as well as government participants. But seeing that was pretty awesome. And I think the last thing from a takeaway perspective was, and it was talked about a lot in the last panel, was this whole natural gas molecule. And, what are we going to do with it? And I think Minister Jean kind of touched on, we like all the different molecules, but some of them are, I don't want to say tougher to get rid of. But when we look at Pembina's strategy, LNG and trying to export these molecules, it's very important to kind of the broader commodity mix. You can't produce oil and NGLs and all these things without kind of addressing all of the pieces of what comes out of the well. So when we think about Pembina and our strategy of connecting markets, Alberta, BC molecules with global markets, this is another market for us. And this is actually a pretty exciting market because it's a built-in Alberta market for Alberta and BC molecules. So it's a great news story, another outlet. And again, going back to the Premier's comments at lunch, we're looking at doubling production. We're going to need homes for these molecules. And it is an and conversation, more to the US, more globally, but here's a great opportunity to use more domestically.
I love the comments about the new markets for our energy molecules. And one of the ways I frame this Because like I've been hearing ever since I was first elected in 2019, Nate, why don't we build more refineries in Alberta? Why don't we add more value to our oil and to our gas and create more finished products and export those instead of just exporting the raw materials? And it's a good question. And my answer to that is this is what data centers are. They are essentially a digital refinery because we are taking the natural gas and we are upgrading it and turning it into electricity. And then we are taking that electricity and upgrading it and turning it into intelligence. And in some cases, then taking that intelligence and upgrading it and adding value to it and creating AI applications that we can export through fiber to anywhere on the planet. So the fiber is the digital pipeline and the data center is the digital refinery. And I was listening to a podcast by Peter Tertzakian from Arc Energy earlier. He was saying you can take $2 of natural gas and turn it into $2,000 of compute. So think about that, what that multiplication effect is. That's why data centers are so important to the economy of the future. And if you imagine it, you know, we are blessed in Alberta to have that natural gas. Not every jurisdiction on the planet that needs compute has the energy. You look at Europe, they can't get the energy. So if instead of trying to figure out how do we ship the energy to them, why not build the compute in Alberta and ship the finished product digitally to the end market? This will bring a global demand for our energy here that is not dependent upon traditional pipelines and traditional infrastructure. We, of course, as a jurisdiction, are pro-oil and gas, pro-traditional oil and gas. We love the work that Pembina is doing with potential pipeline routes, et cetera. We want to see more of that happening. But until we can get that infrastructure built, we have now been able to create a new market that gives us global access for our energy that is using fiber to get the finished product marked up and far more valuable, in some cases, 1,000-fold more valuable.
Yeah, hi there. I think you make an important point as well. And there's a lot of, in data center land, there's a lot of myth busting to do. And one of the key issues that we're always reminding folks is that data centers aren't operated remotely. So we need our teams to live within 45 minutes or less. These are local investments in local communities. And in most cases, you're employing folks who already live there. And in Alberta, what's really exciting is some of that industrial capacity you were talking about. We're already training the trades and professions here that are required in data centers. It isn't sort of, you know, fantastical jobs of the future. It's HVAC, it's engineering, it's welding, it's all of these skills that we already see here that we will be able to employ locally and to build locally.
So next question is for Jay at Bell. PNWR is, of course, a lot more than just Alberta. It's a bunch of states, a bunch of provinces with common economic interests. You've been active in a number of other jurisdictions like Saskatchewan, as your peers, but starting with you, what's your takeaway in other jurisdictions that you're active in?
So I'll say, first of all, I live in Calgary. I'm from Saskatchewan. I didn't fly here from Toronto. You know, I'm really proud of the project that we're doing in Saskatchewan. You know, that's my hometown. I grew up on a farm northeast of there. You know, I went to high school there. You know, that data center is being built in a place that is 10 miles away from where my grandfather homestead, you know, or great-grandfather. And you know, I think we are building out a national platform of data centers. We've got, you know, more than 50 projects that are under development across the country. I think public numbers are that it's more than 2 gigawatts under development. It'll end up being more than that. But the first major project that we announced outside of the ones in BC was in Saskatchewan. And you know, the reason that it made sense to build there is the reason that we're looking at focusing, I think, on the prairie provinces. Because, you know, it was a good regulatory environment. We had cooperation from the government. They still held us to account around all the regulatory process, but they let us move quickly when we could show them that we could move quickly and still, you know, go through due diligence, right? If we could move fast, they showed us that they could move fast. the conversations that we've had with the Alberta government, we've seen the exact same thing, right? They're saying to us, show us that you can move quickly and do this in the right way, right? And we'll support you. And that is not the attitude everywhere. So that makes it more difficult to get things built in some other regions. But that Saskatchewan project actively under construction. If any of the analysts that are watching us on satellites to make sure that we're keeping our construction timelines that we've set, I'll tell you that we are. And the first stage of that is that 300 megawatts, but the expansion of that project, and we're hoping that it does expand, relies on gas that is going to be produced here. And so, I think we have lots of projects that we're looking at. The majority of them are going to be smaller. When we take a look at the kind of large scale projects that I think are going to be the majority of the compute that is built after 2028, kind of that 300 megawatt plus, a lot of the aspirations that we have are right here in this province. So, that's not just because I live here, it's because of all the reasons that we've talked about already. And I think one of the things that I'll add to that is supply chain is a real issue. Access to expertise, access to personnel is an issue. When you're doing projects at this scale, it's hard to fly everyone in to do that. And I think we at Bell try and differentiate, the difference between building a data center and building a data center industry, right? And for the second one, it's about having more value that is captured by Canada, by the community, by the province, and for us to help with capability building and for people to take the skills that they've already got and to apply them to this. And honestly, there's just not a lot of places in the world that have this sort of experience doing projects on the scale that we're talking about that Alberta has, right? Where you have companies that have done billions of dollars of projects with complex timelines that relate. So Saskatchewan obviously, has some of that experience as well. And that's part of the reason why, like I said, you'll see more announcements, I think, from us there and hopefully some in Alberta very soon.
I can add to that one as well. And I also did not fly here from Toronto. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm from Vancouver, so different, just one province over. But when we were looking to open our second Canadian region, we did speak with governments all across Canada. And I think in addition to everything that's been mentioned here, I mean, obviously access to power and skilled workforce. What really was one of the biggest deciding factors was the spirit of collaboration that we found with the Alberta government and the entire Alberta community. Working with Invest Alberta, Calgary Economic Development. We work with the universities. We have a partnership with the University of Alberta. We work with Quantum City. We work with a lot of different organizations, and there's a spirit of let's figure out how to get things done. Let's solve these problems and be able to move these things forward that we don't necessarily see in other parts of the country. And I think that's what's attractive to a lot of other organizations, in addition to all of the other great things that Alberta offers.
Okay, if I could just build on that one more, just a real life example. Minister Glubish and the Premier, I think the Premier was driving through rural Alberta at the time, and just that collaboration and that accessibility to government to get the thing right and to get this done. I think that was very evident in the Meta and Greenlight project that we're working on. So a real life example right there.
Yeah. So just first of all, I grew up in Saskatoon, so Saskatchewan's got a big place in my heart. And when I heard about the Bell Center in Saskatchewan, it gave me a big smile on my face. I'm like, yes, more Western Canadian infrastructure proving that this can be done. And, I looked to that and what I saw is, you've got Sask Power that has the capacity to offer up to 300 megawatts in a very quick time frame. And you've got a government over there that was like, yeah, we welcome this and we'll work with industry to find a way to give them certainty and speed to market. And that really mirrors what we're trying to do in Alberta, right? The way we look at it is time is money. We want to give you the gift of time. If you're going to invest tens of billions of dollars into infrastructure, if you can do it a year or two faster, that's a big benefit to your bottom line. And, the other thing that we looked at is how do we prove that you can do this at a gigawatt scale, not just a 100, 200, 300 megawatt scale, because we knew that demand is coming. And if a jurisdiction can prove that you can build at multiple gigawatt capacity, then they are going to become a big winner. And so that's why we spent the last 2 years redesigning our electricity legislation. We introduced concepts like bring your own generation, that prioritizes projects where you are building your own power plants, like Meta is in partnership with Pembina and Connecticut. We brought in principles like cost causation, which is if you want to build this large load industrial type of infrastructure, you have to pay for all of the infrastructure associated with bringing it online. So the Meta project's paying over $100 million for their own transmission interconnections. Ratepayers aren't paying for this. Meta's paying for this, and that's not by accident, it's by design, and it's not just a one-off negotiated with Meta, it's the standard in Alberta. So what we're doing is we are creating a marketplace where people can say, we know what the rules are, everybody's going to follow the same rules, and everybody can plan accordingly and make their investment decisions. And folks are coming here now, and I think what you're going to see is multiple projects in the gigawatt scale capacity because we've given them that certainty, that speed to market. It didn't happen by accident. It happened by design. We did our homework for 2 years. We've developed new legislation to create that framework and to send a strong signal to the world that this is what you can expect if you come here. And it has to be something that will benefit all Albertans. And we're really proud of the result that we've got so far.
Jay, you mentioned something I'd like to unpack a little bit more, which is supply chain being a challenge. Someone that does a lot of work in electricity, my mind goes to it can take you half a decade or more to get your hands on a gas turbine. I know there's perennial issues with chips as well. So what are the major supply chain sticking points that are slowing you down?
Honestly, the biggest slowdown for us is still regulatory. It's still getting approvals in most parts of the country. Because the other stuff we can solve more easily, right? By being creative. We've got people that are all over the world right now looking to buy up manufacturing lines to make sure that we're going to continue to be able to build without having interruption. And I think one of the things that you're seeing, even on the turbine side, is there's an increasing amount, I think, that's available in the secondary market because there are other places where they're just getting priced out from a power perspective, where they're realizing that those projects don't make sense to go ahead. And again, molecules matter, right? Taking some of those turbines that we're going to go to someplace in, a more expensive jurisdiction and being able to move them to Alberta, right, is going to make sense in a lot of cases. So, there are some specific transformers that are still hard to get a hold of. If anyone has some sitting around in the lot someplace, please come and talk to me afterwards. But really, it's about interconnect timeline. It's about regulatory approvals in most of the places that we're building.
Pinware being Pinware, I really want to dig in on some of the cross-jurisdictional things. So I'm going to ask a similar question of Lauren at Beacon. You're also a major developer, active in both Canada and the United States. Can you talk a little bit about both the economic impacts and opportunities these projects can bring to states and provinces where they are, and how can local communities really maximize those benefits?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd agree with Jay on the supply chain issues. This industry is endlessly creative and fast moving, and many problems can be solved with, some of the folks on this stage and a lot of very innovative folks. And at the same time, we need to take that approach as well to how we communicate about what we do and how we interact with the communities that we're around. So I think the industry's learned a lot of lessons. And we have a lot more work to do. And so, we're we have, a few gigawatts in development here in Alberta. We're in a couple states in the US. And the thing to realize is that when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments, that is transformational. It's transformational for, the provincial economy, but it's also transformational for the local economy. So of course, that has an impact on revenue, tax revenue for the county or the city, wherever the case may be. But it also, there's a massive opportunity to create community investment programs that have real impact. But what you can't do is go in and say, here's a big check do with it what you want. You have to have been there. And, for our sites, we spend years talking to the neighbors, talking to local government, talking to what you could call the influencers. And I don't mean people on Instagram. I mean chambers of commerce, people who are pillars of the community who know what's going on and what matters. And you say, listen, we're looking to make a long-term commitment. This is what it looks like. What can we do here that will be impactful, that will prepare this community in amazing ways? We work with post-secondaries. Coral was talking about that. You can go into high schools as well and say, this is what we're going to need. This is the opportunity here. And then the other thing, and one of the reasons we're very excited actually about Meta and Pembina's work, is that you start to build a kind of an AI ecosystem. And this is something the minister knows very well because he's been working on it for a couple of years now, is you build this self sort of continuing cycle of subcontractors and spaces and programs, because now we're starting to actually really build a AI scale data center sector here in the province that really starts to build into something really remarkable that's long lasting.
Yeah, and well, just to put it into some context in terms of like dollars and cents, everything Lauren said is true, but now let's make it relatable in terms of dollars. You look at the Meta deal, that's going to pay about $20 million a year to Sturgeon County in property taxes, I think. Am I right, Mayor Nissu? Did I get that? Maybe up to 4. So at least 20 million a year in property taxes, and it's not going to require a massive investment by the county into infrastructure to support it because it's in the Alberta Industrial Heartland. This is a region that was zoned decades ago for heavy industry. A lot of that infrastructure was already there. And so this is a huge win for Sturgeon County. Meta is going to spend $60 million building out water infrastructure and roadway infrastructure in the county. They're going to have a not-for-profit support, a fund to support not-for-profits in the region. They're going to be investing in some water infrastructure to ensure that they will be actually water net positive to the region by conservation approaches. They're going to be partnering with some local farmland to preserve that local farmland. There's so many things that they're doing, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars locally to do that, to demonstrate they want to be good partners with the local community. And I know from my conversations with Lauren and the folks at Beacon, they have similar intentions to be good partners. So what our goal as a government here in Alberta is to say, how do we create the conditions where the best projects can succeed? And let's make sure that those projects that do succeed have a plan to be a positive impact, not just at the provincial level, but also at the local level in the communities where they are actually building that infrastructure. So far, so good. We got a lot of work ahead to make sure that we stay on that course. But point I made earlier, it doesn't happen by accident. It has to happen by design.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing that I'll add to that is, I think the aspiration here should be beyond just producing things for domestic demand. Like we've had conversations with SAIT, right, who has an amazing material science department who is working on advancements that could be used in the data centers that are being constructed here that then would allow them to access a market that's global and growing exponentially. Like I think that's one of the things that I don't think that we have done a good enough job of talking about is, the amount of time when we're talking about supply chain that we spend talking to local companies, giving them an opportunity to get into an industry, right, that has a huge market potential, and maybe giving them their first shot at something at scale that's going to allow them to start to market that around the world and to hire people here in order to build that next generation of technologies. And I think, honestly, Alberta is going to benefit from that as much as anyone.
So being democratic about this, the question with the most votes on HUVA is simply, what is the panel opinion? What in the panel opinion is driving very negative perceptions in the public? And I think that's asking the same thing as something that I wanted to ask the panel, which is, we heard from Premier Smith at lunch that Alberta is learning about the challenges faced in other jurisdictions and learning and acting on what they've learned in other jurisdictions when it comes to data centers. Like all big projects, local acceptance is absolutely crucial. So, we heard from the premier some of the issues that she thinks they're going to encounter and some of what the province is doing. We've heard from Minister Glubish similarly on a couple topics, but with 4 people on the panel that are out there, across North America developing these, I want to start by asking, what are the concerns that you encounter the most often?
Well, so I think I think the cause question is relevant because you'll get a different answer from everyone. And really, the reason doesn't matter. It's what you can explain about what you're doing in that community and why. So, but honestly, a lot of the questions are the same no matter where you are. It's water use, it's noise, it's in some cases emissions, not everywhere, but some places. It's things like setbacks, and fundamentally, the data center industry is 20 years old now. We've had data centers among us for a very long time, but to a lot of people, it's new. And to a lot of people, the only way that they have to sort of express any of some of the things you'll hear about AI anxiety, if you will, is a data center. That comes up in their community and they're like, okay, that's it. I've been super concerned about this anyway. I'm going to go talk to these people about it. So, but a lot of times there are misconceptions for sure. I've had people say, you're going to leave the lights on and flood our house all night long. We won't, I promise. Absolutely not. There's no sort of 24/7 lighting of your field, just sort of like really basic. I don't know what this is. I have other anxieties about, anything going on in 2026. And the data center is a great way to kind of get a person to answer what that is about.
I think you touched on this, and that's what I was going to say as well. I think the anxiety about AI data centers and AI are also somewhat mixed together. And I think there's a lot of justifiable, questions and concerns about how these technologies are being used. And I think, working with government and academia, like we're finding a lot of very responsible ways to use these technologies, but there is a lot of misinformation. I work a lot in education, and I get asked all the time, is AI going to take our jobs? Like there's anxiety around, there's going to be no jobs left. I have kids going into university right now. They are asking me, as somewhat of, someone who's supposed to know about this, what are the jobs that we're going to have? But I think you can ask a lot of different people and you'll get a lot of different opinions back. But the one thing that we know is that there are a lot of problems to solve, and AI is allowing more and more people to solve these problems. And even in government alone, there's so many different issues that there's no time or money to get to, that AI is allowing us to actually be able to transform things. And I think through working with governments like the Alberta government, where we're doing such a good job of explaining how these tools are not going to be harmful, but they're going to enhance your lives, I think it can help with the data center anxiety as well, because they do seem to be somewhat conflated in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I built pipelines in Alberta in my 20s. I did gas gathering line services with my brother. Still got some scars. And I think one of the things that bothered me about that at the time was just, I think the public perception around energy here that I would hear from a lot of people, right? When I went down and did a little bit of work in Texas, I'll call out the region, I guess, and I saw what their regulatory environment was like and what they were allowed to do versus what we were allowed to do, how far ahead we were as far as environmental protection, as far as, right, like looking after workers, as far as, the requirements that we had to clean up on the site, we were light years ahead. And for some reason, public perception never caught on to that. And the idea that what I was doing is the same as what was happening some other place, right, was in every conversation that I had around the work that I was up to. And I think that same thing is happening now, right? The data centers that people are hearing about, that they're worried about the water, where the infrasound is keeping their babies up at night, where they're being built, it's happening in a very different regulatory environment, right? I would go to jail if we built something to the standard that they are allowing some of these data centers to be built in some of these regions in the US. And I don't think, I will say, we have not done a good enough job of differentiating so far that in public perception, right? And I think it has something to do with the way that people get their news and just the examples of this that they're seeing. And so I think that that's a part of it. People don't understand the difference. I also don't think that we have necessarily been honest about why it is that Canada needs this. And I think that Canada needs AI more than a lot of other regions in the world, right? We've got a small population, we've got a big area in the cell business, we call that low subscriber density, right? A lot of the services that we kind of have a national value, provincial value, being able to provide, they require big, expensive fixed assets that have a limited draw area, right? And I think there's just an economic reality that we can sort of see. We've got a lot of aging infrastructure. We have an aging population, right? Our kind of aspirations and our economic reality, those things are diverging from one another. And I think AI is about the only thing that I know, unless someone finds a genie lamp, right, that is going to be able to close that gap while we figure out some other stuff. And so I think that we need to embrace it for that reason, you know? And so I don't think that we've told people enough about the benefits or why it is that it's essential for us and how it is that it's different. And I think for a lot of people, this is just a thing that they can be mad about that has a physical representation in a feeling just that they are not hopeful about the future. So
Just to build on that, I think, as Pembina building a number of major projects in various jurisdictions, and whether it's conventional energy or participating in the gas to power, I mean, the questions come up on all major projects. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my community? Concerns, benefits. Having the conversation, I think you said, kind of bringing everybody along. I think this is just part of it. And I think this is good that we're actually tabling these concerns and having the conversations around, what are the issues? What are the benefits for the communities? And making sure that we can bring everyone along. Going back to when we talked about, first reactions from the press release and seeing the announcement by Meta. Yeah, we won, but we've got to win responsibly and bring everybody along. So I think it's a pretty exciting time, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, so just to kind of tie a few of those threads together, a lot of great wisdom from the folks up here on stage. The way I look at it is a lot of the opposition to data center infrastructure that we're seeing in Alberta today is rooted in people who are asking the right questions. They're saying, what is going to happen to our electrical grid? What is going to happen to our water supply? What is going to happen to the land that we have and how much of it's going to be used, and is this responsible? These are good questions to be asking because they've seen cautionary tales from jurisdictions that rushed into this market and they didn't do their due diligence. I can see an example from Louisiana where a gigawatt scale data center was welcomed with open arms, and they signed a deal to say you don't have to pay us any taxes. I think that, well, it was like $750,000 a year in taxes is what they would pay as a payment in lieu of taxes. So almost nothing for a gigawatt scale project. And then they said, oh, well, we'll subsidize and pay for hundreds of millions of dollars of electrical transmission infrastructure to tie you in. And our ratepayers will pay for that. And we'll do this and we'll do that. And then after everything got built, they realized, oh, there's nothing in it for our citizens other than having a big fancy name on a big fancy facility that's generating wealth for the shareholders of that company and only them. So of course, when people look at that, they say, I don't want that in my backyard. I don't want to be subsidizing this. I don't want to see my power bills go up. I don't want to see all of these negative ramifications. But those negative ramifications weren't because data centers themselves are bad. It was because a bad deal was struck by the local jurisdiction who didn't fully understand what they were getting into, and they didn't negotiate for the benefit of their people. The good news is Alberta is worried about these same things just as much as Albertans. And we spent the last 2 years doing our due diligence. My motto is we didn't want to be first, we wanted to be smartest. And we've learned from everybody else's mistakes, and we've hard-coded those lessons into our legislation. Therefore, if you build here, you must pay for your infrastructure. Albertans will not pay for it. We will not subsidize. If you build here, you will pay a levy on your compute infrastructure so that Albertans will see a tax benefit that will help us to fund public services like healthcare and education and public safety infrastructure. We look at the examples of how many jurisdictions allowed for evaporative cooling, where you're essentially consuming the water to cool the systems down. Like that, you don't need to use that infrastructure. It doesn't make sense to use that infrastructure, but it was the cheapest way to do it in a hot jurisdiction like Arizona. But up here, we have minus 40-degree weather. And for once, that's an asset, not a liability. And so what we're seeing is the infrastructure being built here is closed loop liquid cooling systems that pulls the heat off the chips and then takes it to a heat exchanger that takes advantage of that cold, cooler weather in the ambient temperature. There is no water consumed in that process. And that's good news. So folks have they are right to be worried about water and to say, will this be done responsibly? Will this compromise access to water when we inevitably face the next drought, whenever that day may come? The good news is we have some of the strictest water licensing rules in North America, and every data center has to follow the same rules as an oil sands plant, as a gas producing plant, as any industrial plant would require. No exceptions. And we will ensure that the water that is being used in this infrastructure will be done responsibly. But look at Meta, an 1,800 megawatt facility once fully built out, and it's going to use less water than the average golf course. So I think what we as a government need to do, and what I would suggest the industry needs to do along the way is first of all, don't vilify people for being afraid, because there are cautionary tales that are very real that their fears are rooted in. Instead, say, you were right to be concerned about that. We were too. Here's what we're doing differently. And let's give them the facts and let's make it relatable to a layperson audience. Let's stop talking technical and let's talk about something as relatable as saying less water than a golf course. Are we rushing to shut down golf courses? Are we worried about the fact that there's, 10 or 12 golf courses in Sturgeon County and, no, nobody ever worried about that. So why would we worry that we're having one more golf course in capacity with a data center like Meta? So all of these concerns are rooted in legitimate concerns, but we're doing things differently by design on purpose to protect the interests of Albertans. We just need to let them know the details.
Well, we have a very engaged audience. The questions are coming hot and heavy, and they're going back and forth in terms of what is highest in terms of votes. But I don't want to leave water because I know water was one of the hottest topics on the questions. So, Minister, you mentioned that for data centers, province regulates the amount of water they use directly through water licensing. One of the main questions was there's also water usage on the power generation side that would be required to power these generators. So am I correct in assuming that same situation there, directly regulated through water licenses?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't build a power plant unless you get a water license for the water needs that you have. And so if you're in a region that is sparse for water supply, then you're probably going to find it a whole lot harder to get a water license. And you're either going to need to get the water license from somebody else who already has one, or you're going to need to pick a region where there is an abundance of water. So in southern Alberta, we have less water than we do in northern Alberta. So if water is the key thing that you need for your plant, then what we recommend is choose a jurisdiction in Alberta that has an abundance of water. So, for example, we could have gigawatts and gigawatts of power generation capacity up in the Grand Prairie region, and it would use less than 1% of the total flow of the local river there. That water is just flowing through that jurisdiction and flowing out of our jurisdiction and going nowhere and doing nothing. So to use 1% of that water, I would think it's probably pretty reasonable to say we could use 1% of that and it's not going to have a negative repercussion on the surrounding area. But what you'd want to protect against is if you have a scarcity of water and you're drawing upon that and consuming it and you contribute to drought conditions, well, that's something none of us want. The good news is our water licensing rules give us all the tools we need as a government to ensure that those negative outcomes do not happen. But we'd be fools not to leverage the abundance of fresh water that we do have access to create value for our citizens. We just want to do it responsibly. And again, I keep coming back to not by accident, but by design.
I think maybe it's also worth noting that we have some pretty world-class permitting processes. The Alberta Utilities Commission is nothing if not thorough. I had a colleague inform me that I needed to be aware of the toad mating cycle and that we needed to watch out for that in our development, which was a new one on me. Water is part of that because they, of course, approve the power facilities or don't if they're found inadequate. And they have a very rigorous process around consultation, around what technical studies you need. So, none of this, at least here in Alberta, and frankly in some other jurisdictions as well, none of this is left to chance or just left to sort of, companies figuring it out on the fly. You have to tell the regulator precisely what you're doing. And if that plan changes, they need to know.
I think this question of public concern and local acceptance is absolutely key. So I'm just going to keep driving on this a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to some of the questions from the audience. I think, we've covered concerns about affordability in terms of Alberta's approach to bring your own generation and pay for your infrastructure upgrades that you need to make. We've covered water and being directly covered by licensing and other things. I'd bundle up the rest of what I heard the panel say, kind of comes down to being a good neighbor. So concerns about light, concerns about noise. Thoughts on best practices in other jurisdictions or in Alberta that you've seen? And in particular, one of the things that's emerging in Alberta is a focus on trying to use industrial lands, brownfield sites. By Alberta here, we've got a very large designated industrial zone, for example, that's where the Meta project and where Greenlight's going. So anybody want to unpack that a little bit more?
I'll maybe say I've been really impressed with the rollout of the Meta project. I think, watching that as someone that's been doing it, collectively, government and industry, you guys have done a very good job of answering the questions, and I could tell there was a lot of preparation there. So, I appreciate that.
Well, yeah. So for me, it comes down to location, location, location. Number one rule in real estate, it applies here too. There are some places where it just doesn't make sense to build a data center. We got to be honest about that. But there are some places where it is just a logical fit. I think, the Alberta Industrial Heartland is an obvious home run for this type of infrastructure. And there's several sites across the province that have similar characteristics. So, from our perspective at the provincial level, our goal is to say, how do we help folks who are interested in building this infrastructure to identify the best sites that will meet their needs and be able to coexist well with the folks who live in the region. There's lots of places that make a lot of sense. We should be prioritizing those sites. And at the end of the day, if there is a site that just doesn't make sense for the local community, municipalities do have, a lot of jurisdiction over their land use planning and the land use bylaws. So, we encourage municipalities to make the decision that best reflects the needs and priorities of their citizens, and we'll be good partners with our municipalities on that to ensure that we don't want to go and force infrastructure into a community that doesn't want it. But on the flip side, we also need to be open for business. And so if you have something like the Industrial Heartland that has been zoned heavy industrial for 30 or 40 years, and all the consultation was already done decades ago, it was always intended to be heavy industry, then let's make sure we move quickly and take advantage of that, because that is an asset that will benefit the project proponents, but it will also benefit Albertans.
I think just building on that, even those kind of long-standing industrial sites, getting in early, getting in often, and really hearing the community still. What are those concerns? And especially early on in the process, what are those things we can do to change designs and mitigate and try and take that feedback and put it into project designs?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. We have a project in Alabama, and our immediate neighbors are a steel plant, a garbage dump, and a substation. but there's also homeowners. There are still people who live spread in there. So there are a ton of advantages, absolutely, to having a designated industrial zone. But fundamentally, as you just said, we still always have lots of work to do to be good neighbors and as you said, Minister, to be smart about where we're locating these ahead of time.
Coral, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that in many cases, concerns about AI are manifesting in concerns with the data centers that enable the AI. So the top two questions that come to us right now, and they're similar enough, I'm going to try and combine them without losing the thread of them. But I think they both come down to the concerns that you're seeing with AI. And so the first is, have any of you watched the movie Good Luck, Have Fun, and Don't Die? If not, highly recommend it. The killer robots are coming. But the question is really, what morally, ethically, and in general, in terms of the social implications of AI, keep you up at night? What questions should we be asking? And not just the regulatory environment, but the social constraints we should all be contemplating. And then the second highest question is very similar, which is just admiring the sheer speed in which we're seeing advancements in AI, the changing environment, and asking who's leading the conversation around appropriate laws and regulations. And there are people that have significant concerns on where scenarios that AI could take us. So I know that's a broad question, but it's the main thing the audience is asking. So I will lob that grenade across and duck, and you guys can answer.
I think similar to what the minister said about the data centers themselves, these are valid questions and they need to be answered, and we need to be thoughtful about how we're doing this. I think similar to the data centers, there are good and bad examples of things that have happened. There's a lot of excitement right now around these tools. There's a lot of things that are happening quickly. And I think we're learning a lot, but I'm personally just very encouraged by some of the things that I'm seeing in governments all across Canada, where these technologies are being very, very thoughtfully implemented. And I'll give you an example. We did a project with one of the law schools in British Columbia, and they built out an application for legal aid. And right now, if you want to see a legal aid lawyer in British Columbia, you wait about 6 months for a half-hour appointment. They're now able to use some of these AI tools to help at least speed up some of the common questions, because you can go through half an hour with a lawyer. I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, very, very quickly, and not really get to the crux of your issue. And this is being very closely monitored by the researchers and professors at the law school to watch what's happening. They are doing research on the outcomes of this. They are publishing those, they are sharing them. There's a lot of good work going on in government that is very, very carefully being implemented. And I think we have to really celebrate the success of some of these things that are happening and make sure that it's known, some of these things that are really advancing all of our lives. And at the same time, where things don't go right, we have to look at that as well and really understand what happened. Maybe was there more regulation that was needed? Was this the right tool? Did we ask the right question? We have a concept at Amazon where we want to fail fast. Well, failing in public sector can be very, very costly. It can be very detrimental, but we don't want to hinder people from experimenting. But how do we allow them to experiment in responsible ways and then learn from that? And so I think these are valid questions, and I don't think anyone really has all of the answers to how this is going to go because things are changing so quickly. But I am encouraged by there are so many examples in academia, government, healthcare, where this is being done extremely thoughtfully, very, very responsibly. And I think we're learning a lot very quickly.
It's a great question, and there's a lot of angles you could take with that. I'll touch on a couple that I think are really important. First, AI is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Let's not judge the tool based on bad users and bad actors. Let us judge the tool on its merits. And our view as a province is we should be embracing this tool because it will allow us to accomplish things that previously were impossible, that will benefit our citizens. And then let us be watchful for those bad actors and the ways in which they seek to abuse this technology to harm society. And so you are going to see us bringing forward legislation this fall about deepfakes and specifically their use to create intimate images and intimate video without consent. And this will essentially make that against the law, and it will give recourse to victims in those scenarios. This is a clear-cut example where the tool is being used in a way that is harmful, that should be stopped. Rather than saying that AI is bad and we should not allow AI to be used, we are instead saying AI should not be used for this purpose. And if you do it, you are going to get into trouble and it's going to cost you a lot, potentially even jail time. So stay tuned for that. Secondly, we do need to be mindful that this technology, regardless of what Alberta decides to do or even Canada decides to do, this technology is going to be built. You know, if North America decides to stop on a dime, China's not stopping. I can assure you of that. The worst outcome for a democratic Western society is if the Chinese government controls the technological supremacy when it comes to AI. The best defense against that is to ensure that we are competitive with friendly democratic jurisdictions controlling the strongest, most powerful technological tools. Secondly, we also need to be, or thirdly, we need to be mindful that if we do not develop this infrastructure here, we will be subservient to jurisdictions that do have it, and they can turn it off and shut off our access to the tools that we rely on every single day. And we don't need to look, this isn't science fiction, just look at when President Trump didn't like Anthropic's mythos or fable, whatever you want to call it. And he turned it off within a few hours of it being launched and said, if you're not American, you can't use it. Think about that for a second. What if we become dependent upon modern healthcare technology that was built with AI, diagnostic imaging tools that can completely transform the way in which cardiologists and radiologists diagnose heart disease and get a patient onto a treatment path that is precise for that individual? What if another country could turn that off? We need to think about these things, and we need to make sure that we have this infrastructure here, and we can't have this infrastructure here if we don't have the data center capacity here as well. So we need to be mindful that there are risks, but we have to be thoughtful and smart about how we execute and mitigate those risks. And putting our heads in the sand and saying, AI is scary, we don't understand it, we don't want it, that is not a solution. We can't go that route. Final point I'll make is, I know one of the big concerns that people have and fears they have is about jobs. And I want to tell you just a short story. So I have one of our employees in my department who took our AI training, the AI Academy. He's an analyst that works in our contracts division. So he specializes in our ERP system and he specializes in contracts. And he went, after he finished his training, where he learned all about how to build enterprise-grade applications to Alberta standards using our AI agent fleet and using our AI harnesses, he went back and said, oh gosh, I have 15 months of full-time work every single day to port line by line 1,500 contracts into our ERP system, one clause at a time, manually. He thought, I don't want to do that. This is not going to be fun. But there was no one else who could do it because he's the expert. He said, you know what? I think there's a better way. I've just learned the better way. I'm going to figure out a way to use these tools that I've been given in my training. I'm going to build an enterprise grade application on my own, and then I'm going to use that and the power of AI to solve this problem. And so he did. And when he turned it on, after he went through all the checks and balances with our cyber division and our privacy division, made sure he did everything right, he turned it on and it finished the job in 2 minutes. And it cost $1.12 of AI compute infrastructure. So think about that for a second. Imagine if every employee in the government of Alberta could find wins like that in their day-to-day workflow. This was one employee. It wasn't me, the minister, going and saying, you know, Harish, go do this, go use AI. No, we equipped him with the tools and the training and the techniques, and he went and figured out, I can do this. So we empowered him with the ability and the agency to go and add value to the government and to taxpayers and to citizens. And do you think that because he just automated 15 months of work that he's any less valuable to us today? I submit to you, he's one of the most valuable employees we have, because now I know that he can go and do that again and again and again. Do you think he's having more fun today than he did before? Absolutely, because A, he gets to automate the things that are the most painful parts of his job, and B, he sees the impact that he's having for the benefit of society. You know, we call them public servants for a reason. They want to serve the public. He now can see directly the impact he's having for the public good. And we now have hundreds of people like Harish who are going through that same training and doing this. Every single one of them is going to become far more valuable to us than they ever were before. There's not going to be less work for them to do. Governments all over the world have bottlenecks and backlogs and things that they were impossible for them to accomplish before. And now with AI, that impossible becomes possible. So I hope that helps you to kind of shift your thinking that it isn't an apocalyptic future where people are going to be losing jobs like crazy. The focus needs to be, how do we equip people with the tools and the training and the techniques so they can see the art of the possible and apply it in their personal life, in their professional life. And those folks who embrace this technology are going to become some of the most valuable members of society, and they're going to create enormous value for themselves, for their businesses, for their shareholders, and for the citizens in the communities they live in. So our goal is to say, how do we show stories like what Harish did and make it relatable to ordinary people and say, this is what AI can do for you. And now let us help equip you with those tools and that training and those techniques. And so for any of you who, if that story is compelling and you find that persuasive, we write about that on my Substack, nateglubish.substack.com. I tell those stories about public sector innovation with AI. And we've also published the Velocity White Papers, which is our contribution to every jurisdiction that you call home. To say, if you think Alberta is doing something that you want to replicate, guess what? We've just published the roadmap, open source, for free. You can copy paste everything we've done. We've even published our AI agents and our AI harnesses and all of the code that we used to be able to build government level enterprise grade applications to the Government of Alberta standards so that every one of you could copy that for free.
Well, the big red clock says we got 3.5 minutes left. Minister just got an ovation. Seems to me like a good place to leave off and sum it up. I'll just throw it open to the other panelists. Any other concluding thoughts? Or because we are standing between people in the hospitality suite at this point.
I think they've heard enough from us. If you have other questions, you can come see us after.
Well, I'm highly impressed you all stuck to the end, and thank you very much, folks.